This is adapted from the article How Yin Yoga Affects Connective Tissue by Jennifer O'Sullivan. This was printed in SatagenMedium.com. In this article, we look at how Yin Yoga may be affecting our tissues. All of the connective tissues found in the body, including fascia, tendons, and ligaments, are comprised of cells, fibers, collagen, and elastin, and a gel-like fluid called ground substance. The ratio of these elements varies depending on the type of tissue and its location in the body. For instance, your Achilles tendons are thicker and more fibrous than your earlobes, but they are more or less the same thing. The differences in the fiber fluid makeup of these tissues match their functions. An Achilles tendon is thick and elastic so that it can absorb impact and produce power for running and jumping. But the fascia that wraps around the individual muscle fibers in our thighs is less thick and contains a lot of ground substance to reduce friction. Researchers have also discovered that the separate connective tissue types respond differently to different loads. What a ligament needs to maintain its optimal function is not the same as a joint capsule. The overall takeaway from the research is that to sustain the robustness of all of our tissues, we need to engage in a variety of activities. Healthy loads include the kind of passive static stretches and compressions of Yin Yoga. In particular, we know that static stretching stimulates the deep layers of fascia that wrap around the bundles of muscle fibers. Also, the fascia that connects muscles to one another is effective by passive stretches. But passive loads don't affect tendons and ligaments. Due to their arrangement, the relaxed muscle fibers absorb most of the tissue lengthening. But what do we mean by stimulates and affected by? What's really going on here? The primary cells found in fascia are called fibroblasts, and their main job, among a couple of other things, is to create more fascia. The brain doesn't control the fibroblasts. Instead, fibroblast behavior is determined mainly by the mechanical load or lack of loads placed on them. In Yin Yoga, we're mainly interested in the effects of compressive and tensile stretch loads on our tissues. The sensation we feel in the low back during Sphinx or seal pose is a result of compressive forces on the soft tissues and vertebrae. When you fold forward in butterfly pose, you're stretching the back. The fibroblast cells will adjust the production of collagen, elastin, and ground substance to create an architecture best suited for the demands placed on them. These loads need to be progressive, appropriately increased, and occur over an extended period of time. When it comes to remodeling connective tissue, lengths of time are measured in months and years. Researchers have found that the fibroblasts in tendons and ligaments adapt to compressive forces by producing strong fibrous collagen that can withstand additional forces. Without specific research, we can reasonably conclude that compressive Yin Yoga poses contribute positively to fascia health. The effects of tensile loads on connective tissue is less definitive. There just isn't a lot of research on stretching, and what we have has produced mixed results. Multiple variables such as intensity, duration, repetition, etc. make stretching challenging to study. So we're left with contradictory information on and no consistent guidelines for what is beneficial, optimal, or even harmful. To make it more complicated, we, the royal we, keep changing our minds. One day we aren't supposed to bounce when stretching. Now it's the next big thing. Can tissues lengthen when stretched? This seems to be the big point of contention when it comes to yin yoga. The short answer seems to be yes, but. The better questions might be, how long does this lengthening last? Can we retain new length permanently? Is there an endpoint to how much we can stretch before it becomes harmful? Unfortunately, not only are the questions tricky, but we can't answer them with certainty. Here are a few things we do know. Connective tissue do have some plasticity, the ability to undergo change under a load. We know that slow, sustained tensile loads change tissue length more effectively than quick stretch. Think of a plastic grocery store bag. If you tug on it quickly, it resists change. But if you pull on it slowly and carefully, it reshapes and permanently deforms. Eventually, it will tear. The term for our tissue's ability to stretch is called creep. Creep is measured by the amount of force applied, rate, and length of time. Of interest to yin yogis, our tissues creep even if we don't increase the loads. Here's an analogy I like to use. What do you do with a nearly empty bottle of hair conditioner to get the rest out? You turn the bottle upside down and wait. What's happening is that the steady, not increasing force of gravity will slowly pull the conditioner down to the opening of the bottle. The relationship of time to creep seems to indicate that even mild yin yoga poses could lengthen our tissues. I once had a student tell me that she felt like yin yoga postures lasted longer than regular yoga. But I've never heard someone say that the effects last forever, and this certainly hasn't been my experience. The plastic bag analogy only goes so far because plastic bags aren't living tissue. Fascia is also elastic, so when you remove the loads, the tissues gradually recover their original shape as long as they aren't overstretched and damaged. Some studies have shown that very long holds of around 20 minutes can take hours to recover, but they do recover eventually. There's also another factor to consider when we ask ourselves, what are we doing in yin yoga? Involuntary tissue contraction. This will surprise very few people, but we humans unconsciously contract our tissues in response to stress. Physical, psychological, emotional, etc. If we're under stress for an extended period of time, we can forget how to relax, meaning that our tissues may remain in a constant contractive state, even when the stressor has been removed. Further, we find that this constant state of contraction leads to a thickening of the fascia. The research suggests that many people aren't feeling an increase in range of motion after stretching, but rather they experience a return to a normal resting state. On the cellular level, stretching does produce changes which over time can create adaptations and remodeling of the tissues. Just like compression, tensile loads on connective tissues stimulate the fibroblasts to produce more collagen fibers, which increases fascial thickness and strength. What we don't know is how long one must hold these loads for meaningful and permanent changes to take hold, nor do we know how much is too much before we can cause damage. Likely, this Goldilocks sweet spot is different for everyone. Other interesting benefits of yin yoga. Approximately 70% of the volume of fascia is made up of water found in the non-fibrous ground substance. Both stretching and compression play a significant role in tissue hydration. When you load tissue, fluid is squeezed out into the lymphatic system, including fluids present as a result of swelling. When the loads are released and the tissues are left to rest, new fluid is pulled back in like a sponge. Loading our tissues, especially neglected ones, refreshes them. We did an informal study of this phenomenon in my yin yoga training with Paul Grilly. We measured the height of the same person in the morning, afternoon, and after yin yoga practices. Throughout our day, humans lose height as a result of fluid loss in our vertebral discs. When we measured our subject after a yin yoga practice, we consistently saw that she regained some of her lost height as her spinal tissues rehydrated. Well-hydrated tissues have a springing quality that helps them to return to their original shapes after being loaded. Hydrated tissues also respond better and more efficiently to stress, and well-hydrated tissues can more easily transfer nutrients to the cells and rid the body of toxins. Perhaps one of the most intriguing discoveries about fascia is that it is our greatest sensory organ, and it plays a major role in our proprioception and interoception. Movement modalities that emphasize physical awareness and internal listening can help refine the sensory nature of our tissues. Preliminary studies have shown an inverse relationship between pain and proprioception, making this a worthwhile pursuit. This is particularly exciting for those of us who practice yin yoga. When we hold non-neutral shapes for 5+ minutes, we have a lot of opportunity to practice listening to our outer and inner states. Taking our time between poses to notice the before and after effects can also enhance our sensing abilities. Though not impossible, it's much harder to pay attention to how we feel in more dynamic practice, since much of our mental energy is devoted to orchestrating our movements. Is yin yoga safe? Critics of yin yoga worry about that practitioners can overstretch their joints. Because there's no specific studies of yin yoga to date and relatively few studies of stretching overall, it's hard to refute. We don't know what our thresholds are when it comes to stretching. It is possible that someone could overdo it in a yin pose. The problem could be that a pose is not appropriate for that person due to their unique anatomy or physiological state. It's also possible that everything in her movement history up to that moment could make a singular pose the last straw. This could happen in any yoga class, as well as a number of other movement modalities. It doesn't make yin yoga inherently more dangerous than other forms of exercise. It's also theoretically possible that someone could, over time, practice so much yin yoga that he overstretches his tissues to the point of instability. We should also remember that the loads in yin yoga are relatively low. And some might say that body weight isn't progressive enough to create lasting change anyway. When you consider that our tissues start to recover to their original starting point as soon as you remove the load, it seems highly unlikely that a semi-regular yin yoga practice would be dangerous. Of course, a lot of would depend on what else you're doing with your body when you are not practicing yin yoga. In my own purely subjective experience as a woman in her early 40s, I've noticed that I need to target the same area for at least a week before I experience what feels like lasting increases in range of motion. I find this particularly true of side bends. We don't do a lot of side bends in our daily life, and often the only time I do them is in my yoga practice. So if I stop doing them for even a few days and I return to them later, I find that I lose those flexibility gains. This is due to a process called contracture, which is a loss of mobility in a joint. Contracture can be a result of an injury or illness, but immobility also causes it. Paul Grilly points out that you rarely, if ever, see very elderly people walking around loose and fancy-free. Instead, as we age, the body tends to retract. Our gait becomes shorter because of a loss of range of motion, and we shuffle along hunched over. I observed this in my mother-in-law, who was in her early 70s and was a champion rower in the World Masters circuit. She also ran regularly and would get down on the floor to crawl around with our then toddler. A few years ago, she suffered a stroke and had to give up all of that. Her loss of mobility and agility was striking. Some of it is due to the effects of the stroke, but a lot of it was the inevitable consequence of immobility. Our tissues need both compressive and tensile loads to keep us feeling vibrant and youthful. Creep recovery and contracture make it pretty hard to go overboard with a yin yoga practice. I think you would really have to try. This is especially true when you remember that yin yoga teachers will remind you to approach the practice with a spirit of being rather than doing. The whole gestalt of yin yoga is to do less.